I'm not that interested in being part of the production. Do that. Okay. 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 So sometimes cross-cultural research works, and sometimes cross-cultural research doesn't work. And one of the things that you need to think about is that not all research is perfect. Some research is just done so that people can get their PhDs. If you are a PhD and you're teaching at select institutions, you have to publish, so they publish crap. Their research is not very good, and they publish crap. So the reality is that you need to be very skeptical when you read these things. When you go into graduate school, they're going to expect you to be very critical, very critical about whether the research is working or whether the research isn't working. Shut up and leave me alone. There we go. Every study has potential methodological shortcomings or alternative theoretical explanations. We are working in psychology. Psychology is not absolute. There are very few absolutes in psychology. Things change over time, normally. So the reality is that potentially you're going to find methodological shortcomings. Sarah and I were discussing this the other day. Of course, she was a researcher, so she doesn't like to think that that there are problems with research. She wants to think that everything is, if they say it, then it must be true. Well, you know, that would be nice. But the reality is that things change over time. And not only that, but things change in a matter of days and weeks and years. So we need to be a little bit critical of what's going on. One important skill that students learn in graduate school in psychology is precisely how to come up with alternative explanations for virtually any study that they encounter. And a lot of times you'll see that they haven't dealt with a select variable. And of course, we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge the fact that possibly there is a problem with our research. Hopefully you've looked at all this stuff as you're thinking about your research, and so you have thought about all the variables, the conflicting variables that you're dealing with. Hopefully you've done that. Okay. Hopefully you recognize the fact that the population that you have used is not an absolute population. If we're talking about college students are different from everybody else. For one thing, they drink more beer. They really do drink more beer. Not on this campus, of course, because this is a dry campus. But if we were at the University of Arizona, ASU, yeah, they drink a lot more beer. University of Michigan, Stanford, it really doesn't matter where you are. Notre Dame, they all drink more beer than people normally do. It's just the way it works. Most of them will be traditional students. They'll be between the ages of 18 and 21 or 22. They'll be traditional students. And of course, how representative are people that are 18 to 22? Well, the reality is that their brains aren't even adult yet, right? So we need to be skeptical. We need to look at the populations of the individuals that we're dealing with. It's cheaper, it's easier, it gives you better information if we're dealing with a captive audience, like the students that were in here in the previous class. This place was packed. We could do research on those students, but what would that tell us? That would tell us about students between the ages of 18 and 22 living on the Navajo reservation. That's all it would tell us. So could we equate that to the Hopi? Could we equate that to the Sioux? Could we equate the results that we get from this classroom to the Cherokee out in Oklahoma? Could we do that? American Indian, they've got the same label, right? Could we equate it to the Blackfeet? And the answer is probably no. Probably no. In science, researchers and readers of research use the principle of Occam's Razor. And of course, if you watch Big Bang Theory, Sheldon talks about Occam's Razor all the time. They're trying to determine what the quality of the research is, so they use the concept of Occam's Razor. Occam's Razor. Occam was a Turkish researcher. He was kind of a fascinating fellow. And people would come up with these very complex theories. And he said, you know, the reality is that you're trying to find, you're using too complicated assumptions. The simplest assumption is probably the correct assumption, and that's what Occam's Razor is all about. It's about shaving off any of the extraneous assumptions. If you're going to do research, make it as simple as possible, and that has to do with Occam's Razor. All else held equal, Occam's Razor maintains that the simpler the theory will be the more correct theory, which is kind of nice if you think about it, because some things are very, very complicated. My son is working on his master's degree in mathematics. And some of the classes he takes, I can't even pronounce the words that describe the classes. I know, it's that bad. Physics is the same way. Very, very complex. Tends to be very complex. But we need to make it as simple as we possibly can so that people understand what's going on. Following Occam's Razor, a single explanation is more parsimonious. Parsimonious is an interesting word. It actually means Occam's Razor is what it means. Parsimonious means making things as small as possible, making things as understandable as possible. The more parsimonious and more likely to be correct than 4 separate explanations, and of course that's Occam's Razor. So it's a good theory to live by. Let me show you this is really kind of interesting. This is about the South and how violent the South is. If we look at all the violent crime in the United States, and this is out of 2012, this is statistics out of 2012. We look at all the violent crime in the United States, and we divide the United States into 4 different sections: Midwest, Northeast, the South, and the West. If we look at all of the violent crimes that are taking place, you don't have anything. You don't have anything.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. You need a sheet of paper, or we can steal a sheet of paper from somebody. Here, you have to have something. Here. There. Oh, you're welcome. There. See, now at least you have something in a piece of paper. Jeff's a nice guy.
Can you get a pen as well?
Okay, if we look at all the violent crime in the United States, we've divided these into 4 different sections, but the reality is more people live in the West and in the Northeast than any place else. We have lots of people living in New York City. We have lots of people living in Boston. The Midwest has Chicago, and what else does it have? It has Kansas City and Omaha and Cincinnati. But the most people in the United States live in the Northeast and the West. However, if we look at violent crime, look at this, almost 500,000 violent crimes. As compared to the Northeast, 194,000. That's almost 200,000. 200,000 and almost 500,000. And there aren't as many people here as there are up here. Look at the West, 284,000, close to 300,000, but it's still 200,000 violent crimes behind the South. The Midwest, 238,000, about 250,000, but there's still half as many as are in the South. I've complained about my brother. Remember my brother that carries a pistol everywhere he goes. Well, he lives in South Carolina. He was born and raised in Indiana, in the Midwest, where there's not that much violent crime. Now he lives in the South, where there's a lot of violent crime. Obviously, there's a lot of violence down there. He married a woman whose first husband, he is her second husband, whose first husband was killed in a bar fight over a gambling debt. A pool game where somebody was supposed to win $2. And I don't know which one was the guy that died. I don't know if he died because he didn't pay the $2 or if he died because he was trying to get $2 from somebody else. But he was stabbed and killed. for $2. $2. How important is $2? I got $2 right here. Does anybody want it? That's how important $2 is. I'll give you $2. I'll give you $2 in dimes. I got $2 in dimes in my pocket. But he died because of $2. In the South, in South Carolina. Research has always shown that the South is the most violent region in the United States, and that it has been true since the very founding of the nation. De Tocqueville said that the South was much more violent than any place else in the United States, and he was writing in 1835. So the South has always been more violent than every place else in the United States. While violence exists in other regions of the country, the Old West, for example, the South has led the nation in lynchings, sniper attacks, feuds, homicides, and duels. Just over the weekend, a guy went into a church in Nashville and started blasting away. It was in Charleston, South Carolina, that a guy decided that he was going to shoot up a black church, and he killed 9 people, I think. And they just convicted him of murdering 9 people. It was in South Carolina. When was the last time somebody shot up a church in Arizona or New Mexico? Yesterday? Last week? Never? Who does this stuff? Well, people in the South do. Andrew Jackson, who's on our $20 bill, and I've got a pocket full of 20s. I just got some money out of the machine. So I've got a bunch of Andrew Jacksons. He once killed a man in a duel over the honor of his wife. Now, strangely enough, the man had insulted his wife because his wife was a bigamist. Well, she really was a bigamist, but he killed him anyway. Shot him in a duel. He was actually wounded in the duel and almost died himself. But Jackson's wife was actually married to 2 men at the same time. Him and her first husband, who the divorce hadn't gone through yet.
Oh,
Whoops.
is that what that means?
Yeah.
Okay, I was wondering what that meant. Okay.
Isn't that bizarre? Fisher in 1989 speculates that the South has always had more tolerance for aggressive pursuits. Reports from colonial days chronicle no-holds-barred fights where eyes were gouged and noses and ears were bitten off, as attractive as that is, or purring, where 2 men held each other's shoulders and kicked each other in the shins until one of them let go. How stupid is that? Let's go purr. Yeah. They play this game in England. As stupid as it sounds, you kick the other guy until somebody lets go. And this is what it looks like. They put straw in their pens. You can put straw in there, but you kick and kick and kick until somebody lets go.
You don't have to do that.
What do you mean you don't have to do that? Oh, put the straw in? No, you don't have to put straw in. You
Yeah,
can just kick the other guy. I know, this is fun.
My brother and his friends used to do that for no reason. I never understood why they were doing that.
They're kittens, they're cats. They wanted to purr.
I guess so.
The South has always been more tolerant than the North concerning corporal punishment of children. We flew in from Japan. Our next assignment was Mississippi. And the first thing we heard on the radio, we're listening to the radio driving to our new house, and we're listening to the radio and they're talking about whooping children. They had, the state was thinking about writing a law where you couldn't spank children in school. And they were against it because a good whooping is what most kids need. They need to be whooped. I was appalled. I was shocked. I raised both my kids without ever having to hit them. All I did was talk to them. I didn't have to pop them at all. I just talked to them. And as you can imagine, a long conversation with me is fairly painful. Far more painful than a spanking would be. Anyway, corporal punishment of children, capital punishment of criminals. Almost everyone that's executed in the United States is executed in the South. Texas is the number one. Texas is number one. Texas is number one. Texas executes more people than all the other states combined. That's how good Texas is at executing people. Gun ownership, of course, in the South is endemic. Going to war whenever the gauntlet is mentioned. Of course, they want to They want to go bomb the North Koreans right now. Even though nothing's really happened yet, they're just kind of barking back and forth. Trump won't shut up. What does he think? If you rattle that saber, somebody's going to think that you're really going to draw it. What an idiot. I'm sorry. I had the same problem with Reagan. Reagan kept doing the same thing with the Russians. Southern high school students are more likely to bring a weapon to school. The South has more school shootings than any other area of the United States. A lot of really ugly stuff going on with the South. Sorry about that. There have been several theories as to why the South has evolved one way and the rest of the country has evolved in another way. When we talk about the Civil War, the South won almost all the battles in the Civil War. They did. With fewer men, but they still almost won the war. Why? Because they're more violent than the North, than people from the North. Hot, uncomfortable temperatures. This is what Anderson speculated in 1989. It's hot down there, and it's humid, and it makes people grouchy. Greater poverty. That Tocqueville said that that should be 1835, not 1935. Longer history of slavery, where there is a tolerance for inhumane treatment. And this is de Tocqueville again in 1835. So these are some of the theories that people have come up with. But we have two new guys, and they have come up with another idea. Nisbet and Cohen in 1996 posit that one factor that has led to more violence in the South is that the South was settled by herders, which has given rise to a culture of honor. And of course, they're still talking about the honor of the South. That was one of the things that Charlottesville was all about. It was about the honor of the South. Oh, you can't take down that statue because that statue represents our heritage. Despite the fact that that statue also represents slavery. Well, we want it to represent what we want it to represent. And we'll ignore all the other negative things about it. A culture of honor is one where the men strive to protect their reputation through aggression. So they're not just trying to protect something, they're trying to protect their reputation. So they're trying to create a reputation of strength, a reputation of violence, a reputation of aggression. And that's why my brother carries a gun. Everybody knows he carries a gun. He carries it on his hip. He tells everybody that he was a colonel in the United States Army. Scares the shit out of everybody. No, it doesn't. I'm just kidding. Colonels don't scare anybody. But he carries a gun with him wherever he goes. Herders are more susceptible to violence because their wealth is more portable, where the land is more marginal. And of course, that's where you're living in a very marginal area. Everybody's got, well, not everybody, of course, but a lot of people have sheep. They maintain sheep here. I don't know how the hell you ever feed them because there's hardly any grass out there.
We grow alfalfa.
You must feed them hay coming down from the north.
No, we can grow it here. We can actually have good fields here. You know, my husband, he works with a lot of ranchers and everything around here. And they're starting to get their fields back in order and growing it.
That's great.
It's hard, but we do it.
When Michelle was 13, I brought her and her brother down here, drove to Tuba City. Joe showed me a shortcut that seemed to take 3 times as long, but that's not important. So I get to Tuba City. I drop them off in Tuba City, and I take off down to Phoenix, and then I drove back. So I drove through the reservation twice. I didn't see a blade of grass the whole time I was from Tuba City all the way to Utah. I didn't see the blade of grass at all. And I saw sheep, but I didn't see any grass. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And this was, I don't know, how long ago was it? That was back in 2000. When were you 13?
How old are you, Michelle?
I don't know, it was like 2005, 2006, something like that.
Well, my grandma has sheep, and they usually get hay, especially like during the winter. But during the summer, they usually graze, but there's not a lot of grass.
You gotta take them from one place to the other. I was talking to a guy, lives out at Lucha Chukai, And he's got a winter camp and a summer camp, and evidently he takes them up into the mountains in the summertime. He's got a winter camp. I don't know, I have no idea how he feeds his sheep, or whether he feeds them at all.
That's what they used to do, but now they keep them at one spot. But yeah, a lot of people graze where
Yeah.
there's grass or whatever.
Right, he just lost a horse. He let his horse out to graze, and it took off and got hit by a car. So, just lost his horse. He called me up and he wanted me to, his truck broke down. All I got is a Miata. What am I gonna do with a Miata? Anyway, he had a whole truck full of kids. I don't know. I can carry one person. Okay, so herders are susceptible to violence, and the reason is because you can transport sheep really easily. You can pick one up and carry it if you want. So you can lose his stuff real fast, and that's a problem. Thus, it is important for herders to develop a reputation of violent retaliation to keep thieves away from their wealth. And this is why they have a culture of honor, because we're trying to keep people from stealing their stuff. The sense of honor has to be established before your wealth is affected. Thus, you need to be violent before anyone tries to steal your livestock. So these people are violent all their lives. It's to keep the people from wanting to steal their stuff. If they know that they will retaliate by injuring them, by being aggressive, then people are less likely to try to steal their stuff. Ooh, you don't want to steal Jeff's stuff. He's a mean son of a bitch. He'll kick the holy hell out of you because he and his brother used to kick each other in the shins like all the time. Well, your brother too. So that's the whole idea behind this heavy violence. The herder culture of honor is not limited to the United States, but may have been brought here by the Scots-Irish, who made up a lion's share of people settling in the South. They were herders in the old country, and of course, if you've ever been to Scotland, it's not the nicest place in the world, not a whole lot of grass. Heather, which I'm not exactly sure if sheep can eat, but of course, you know, they were these really tough guys, and they fought all the time, and they always carried weapons with them. If you've ever seen Rob Roy, or what's that movie with Braveheart? Isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the crazy Australian guy. I can't think of his name. Herders around the world maintain this bloviated code of honor where they fight each other all the time. They injure each other. They'll do just about anything to warn people that I'm a mean son of a bitch and you better not mess with me. Don't ever steal my stuff because I'll come after you. And that's the idea behind the code of honor. Looking at archival data, Nisbet and Cohen in 1997 found that when you compared records of rural North with the rural South, they found that not only was the homicide rate higher, but when they compared herding regions of the South with farming regions of the South, the homicide rate was twice that in herding regions. So wherever they had loose livestock, it was more violent, far more violent, to the extent of twice as many homicides in herding areas as in any place else. So when we watch an old movie about the cattle people in the West, and you can watch any movie you want, I guess, but it was always the cattlemen that were more violent than just about anybody else. And they were really upset with the homesteaders because the homesteaders were taking away their grazing land. They were turning them into fields. They really weren't using that much land. I mean, they were only using 50 or 60 acres. This guy's got thousands and thousands of acres. He can lose those 50 or 60 acres, but he still tries to get rid of them, right? He still tries to kill them. Just to show how tough he is. And we have seen this throughout the rural South. Not in the rural North, even though they have livestock up there. Everybody used to raise cattle and pigs. I know, in the North, everybody had cows and pigs. But of course, we're not wandering around shooting each other like they were in the South. Cohen and Nisbet in 1994 next conducted a telephone interview of Northerners and Southerners. and discovered that while they have similar negative feelings about violence, Southerners were more likely to have positive attitudes toward defending their families or their honor. What the hell is honor anyway? We know what it is to a Southerner. It's just about everything to a Southerner. And this is one of the reasons why we're having this horrible argument about statues. Why in the world would you argue about statues? Because as far as the South is concerned, this is part of their honor. The North is going, I have no clue what you guys are talking about. Why? Because they don't feel the same way. They don't have the same strange sense of honor that people in the South have. Now the sad thing is that I'm married to a lady from the South. She's from Georgia, and her people actually own slaves. But she's kind of interesting because she was in the military for 24 years, and she lost this strange sense of honor that people in the South have that people in the North don't have. So she wants to take the statues down. She doesn't agree with all the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazis and all the rest of the interesting people.
Have you ever seen the Underground Railroad? Or seen a part of it?
Are we talking about the actual Underground Railroad, or are we talking?
Yeah.
The Underground Railroad was just a trail that went from the South to Canada. Actually, it went to Canada. As it turns out, family history. As it turns out, people in my family were part of the Underground Railroad, and they actually hid people. So that was kind of interesting.
So your family hid the slaves, but your wife was a slave owner, or her
My family,
was-
yeah, because my family has nothing to do with her family.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my family, part of my family were Quakers, and they were nonviolent. And part of my family, we almost all of us were abolitionists on both sides, my dad's family and my mother's family. So it's really kind of interesting. Yeah, it was just it was a series of hiding places. So they'd go from one hiding place to the next hiding place. And they would hide in my uncle's, or my great uncle's store in his basement, where they stored all the stuff.
And they traveled at night, right?
They traveled at night. We were in Delaware County, and the next county over is Henry County. Yeah, Henry County. And that's a Quaker county. So it was really easy for them to find someplace to hide in the next county over. But they, of course, they were coming north, and they couldn't go over here because there were Southern sympathizers in the other counties. So they had to come to Delaware County and then go directly east over to Henry County and Randolph County. Those were both Quaker counties. As a matter of fact, in Randolph County, Richmond, Indiana has one of the largest Quaker colleges in the United States. Earlham. Worst football players in the world. They call themselves the Fighting Quakers, which, they don't, Quakers don't fight. It's kind of a joke. We're the only ones that get it, I guess. Noting that testosterone rises when men are ready to aggress, Nisbet and Cohen et al. In 1996, the researchers arranged for Southern and Northern students to be put on vaguely insulting situations. In vaguely insulting situations, he then measured the testosterone for each participant. Measuring testosterone from saliva samples, the researchers discovered that while Northern students reacted, they reacted minimally to the insult. Their testosterone didn't rise hardly at all. It went from 4 to 5 milligrams of testosterone. The Southern students were ready to aggress after the insult with a testosterone level of an average testosterone level of 12.5 milligrams from a level of 4. So theirs went up 3 times, and the Northerners only went up 25%. Hardly went up at all. But the Southerners, their testosterone level went up 300%. So you can compare 25% to 300%. Is this real? Is this good research? Does this make any sense at all? Come on, we're all from the same place, aren't we? They were mostly all white people. Are white people from the north really that much different from people in the south? Is it possible? What do you think?
I think people from the South they really stand by like their values and what they believe and their honor, you know. Like if you say something bad about Trump, you're not a good Christian. And I've seen a lot of people from the South starting to say that, you know. And so I'm like, well, Trump is taking away Social Security from your mother who lives alone. And they're like, that's fine. But you have to respect the president. You have to put your hand on your heart, you know, during the Pledge of Allegiance. And, you know, so they're like, you're not a good Christian. And I'm
Were they respecting Obama?
No, they didn't.
I know.
They didn't.
It's kind of bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is possibly very real.
It is.
This is possibly relatively accurate. I know it looks like a pile of horse manure, but the reality is, I mean, they measured the testosterone. They insulted Northerners, and the Northerners hardly reacted at all. They insulted Southerners, and their testosterone went up 300%. More than 300%. Right? Northerners, their testosterone only went up 25%. The Southerners' testosterone went up 300%. And of course, they voted for Trump. That's not important. Okay. This is fascinating. Cohen and his colleagues in 1996 conducted a similar study where they forced the participants into a narrow hallway with a much larger person. What they were measuring was how long it took the participants to step out of the way, out of this man mountain's way. I mean, they had a football player, and he was really big. So there was no possibility that they were playing chicken with a person the size of an elephant. So who's going to move first was the question. Then they did something really fascinating. The situation was set up by either insulting the participant before they played hallway chicken or not. Northerners reacted in a similar manner whether they were insulted or not. They moved at 60 inches when they weren't insulted, or when they were insulted, and 75 inches when they weren't insulted. So rather than having a confrontation with this monster man, they just moved out of the way, and it didn't bother them at all. Southerners, on the other hand, stepped out of the way earlier when they were not insulted at 110 inches, just to make sure that they were out of the way. However, when they were insulted, they were ready to take this guy on. They didn't move until they were 35 inches away from him. 35 inches is less than a yard. So when they were insulted, when they were pissed off, they almost had a confrontation with this guy. As bizarre as that all seems, the culture of honor was in play here. I mean, despite the fact that they were little wimpy people and they couldn't possibly take on the man mountain, they were willing to take him on. 35 inches is less than a yard. They were almost nose to nose with this guy before they moved, as bizarre as that sounds. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 4. As much fun as that was, I know, we're talking about Southerners. I was insulting my wife, my goodness gracious. Every weekend, my wife watches the Georgia Bulldogs play football. If they lose, she's not a happy person. And if she's not happy, then she's not very nice to me. I'll just put it that way. We won't take it we won't go beyond anything else. Okay. Anyway, my wife, the Georgia Bulldog fan. Okay, let's see what happens next in chapter 5. One key adaptation that enabled humans to distinguish themselves from their proto-chimpanzee ancestors was the ability to learn and accumulate cultural information so well. And of course we do. That's one of the reasons why we can live in cities. We communicate with each other on the internet a lot. Chimpanzees, of course, their communication is relatively limited. But then again, we are humans, and we have developed, we can learn things, and we can accumulate information through our language. This adaptation allowed humans to learn the requisite technologies and skills to stake out a successful existence in such diverse environments as ice-encrusted Arctic hinterlands. If you go up to the Eskimos, what we don't refer to as Eskimos anymore, I apologize, the Aleuts and the Inuits and all those individuals that live up in where it's really, really cold. The thick Amazonian jungle, and there are still people living there that we don't know, we have no clue about. But these individuals have lived for an extended length of time in the jungle. The parched Kalahari Desert, there are Bushmen that live in the Kalahari and are able to survive in that environment. And one place that I would hate to even try to survive is the dog-eat-dog corporation world of Wall Street. You know, it's bad enough working with the bureaucracy of Diné College or Ashford University for that matter. But I don't think I could survive in that environment, not that environment. I'm having a hard time dealing with the bureaucracy of this institution. I'm not very good at it. I'll probably get fired. It's going to be one of you guys' fault. No, I'm just kidding. It's going to be my fault. I know it's my fault. I'm not very good at dealing with bureaucracy. A sensitive period is a period of time in an organism's development that allows for the relatively easy acquisition of a set of skills. Our brain seems to be structured so that we learn select things at select times. As a tiny baby, we learn how to pronounce vowels, we learn how to pronounce consonants. And there is a select time when this takes place. We learn how to learn languages. If you learn a language before the age of 12, you probably can learn it fairly well. After the age of 12, not so much. Much, much more difficult. Because our brains are structured to learn things, to learn language, from 0 to 12. If an organism misses the chance to acquire these skills, it would have a difficult time doing so later after the sensitive period has expired. And we have seen this. We've seen wild children coming out of wherever. They've somehow been able to survive. They've never learned to speak. And they never do learn to speak very well. There was an individual that, for some reason, her mother and father were a little bit whacked out. So they locked this kid in the attic. And they didn't discover this kid until she was 14 years old. They had her chained to a potty chair. As stupid as that sounds, there was nothing intellectually wrong with the child. There was nothing wrong with the child except for the fact that she had never had any stimulation. They never talked to her. They found her at age 14. She never learned to speak.
Where at?
It was in California. There's a famous child of Avignon. There was a wild boy of Avignon that they never were able to teach him how to speak. He had missed his sensitive period when he could learn languages. Human cultural learning continues throughout our lifespan. I'm still learning my cell phone. I still don't know how to get my text messages. But my wife said she'd teach me when she comes back down here. So, I hope. This thing drives me crazy. It just makes all kinds of strange noises and I have no idea what it means. I was watching television the other day. It said that we check our cell phones 85 times a day on the average. 85 times a day. What do you think? Do you check your cell phone 85 times a day?
I heard it was 100.
This is a television commercial.
Yeah, probably.
85? What do you think, Jeff?
I think so.
Chris, you think you check your cell phone 85?
Yeah, I'm about that range.
Brandon, you check your cell phone 85 times a day?
About that much, yeah.
Oh my God. Michelle? Oh my goodness. So I'm retarded. Is that what you're trying to tell me? There's something wrong with me. I'm backward. I check my phone maybe twice or 3 times a day. I'll look at my email at least once a day. How about that?
You're just old fashioned.
So if you email me something, give me 24 hours to even look at it. But as soon as I read it, I'll answer it. So,
It's not on your phone?
what? My email? Oh, no. I mean, no. My goodness, no. How horrible would that be? I'd have the administration emailing me, and it would pop up on my phone and make a funny
You can
noise.
go to the IT for that. I have my school email set up for IT.
I don't want to. Don't make me, okay?
It's so convenient though.
I don't like it.
Okay.
I don't even want to check my email, but I do anyway. I've got an email that I haven't looked at Facebook in probably 6 months. I know, there's something wrong with me. Language ability is a hallmark human characteristic, and although there are rudimentary language skills in some other species, no other species is as dependent on language skills or has as complex a language system as humans do. And of course, some languages are more complex than others. As we know, the Navajo language is extremely complex. And it makes sounds that I don't know that I can ever make. It's one of the reasons I'm afraid to try to learn Navajo, because you make a sound with your tongue up against the top of your, kind of like that, and I don't know that I can do that. Not on a regular basis. I speak Spanish with the most god-awful accent you could possibly imagine. Spanish-speaking people make fun of me because my accent is so bad. Because I can habla español, but I habla español like a Hoosier, okay? So, and they tell me that. Once upon a time, I was doing educational research in Los Angeles, and we were going to all the junior high schools in the Los Angeles area, and there are hundreds. Anyway, most of the kids in the public schools in the Los Angeles area are Hispanic, and I had to pronounce everybody's name. Ramirez. Okay? Except I said Ramirez. Oh my God. And then they would correct me. Ramirez. Gringo, what's wrong with you? You can't pronounce my name. But the one that was the worst was Cepeda. Evidently, the way I pronounced it, it meant, I don't know, penis or something. I have no idea. Cepeda or Zapeda with a Z. Cepeda? C-E-P-E-D-A? Cepeda. I have no idea. What does it mean? You know what it means. They wouldn't tell me. These are 8th graders. They wouldn't tell me. We're mature. We can. What does it mean? Blowjob?
It's
What does it mean?
oh
You tell me after class.
yeah, I can't say. I'm already embarrassed.
Just
Of this.
tell us.
It's too nasty.
No, it's
What could possibly be more nasty than?
Is it a body part?
Is it a body part? That's a good.
oh no, it is, but it's like fellatio kind of.
I'm sorry.
Fellatio.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, kind of like that.
okay. So it is a blowjob.
Yeah.
No.
I couldn't think. I was like, yeah. I was like, no.
Oh, great! I just said blowjob on the video. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I no habla español. Obviously. Un poquito. Just my luck. I've got somebody that speaks Spanish. Just my luck. Humans are capable of producing, recognizing, and using approximately 150 different phonemes. These are unit sounds. And as I was saying before, the Navajo language seems very complex to me. The sounds that some people make, I don't think that I can make them with my mouth. Strangely enough, French is the same way. French vowels, they make their vowels farther back in their mouths. And for that reason, the French do not like it when somebody mispronounces their words for some ungodly reason. There are no languages with more than 70 phonemes, but there are 150 different sounds that you can make, but almost all languages only have a handful. English has 46, sometimes 50 depending on what part of the country you live in. And of course I've asked how many phonemes the Navajo language has, and nobody can give me the answer. Not even our Spanish scholar over here knows.
No idea. No idea.
Okay. People are not able to discriminate easily between phonemes that are not their own language. And this gets really humorous, or not, depending on where you are. The Japanese language does not have separate phonemes for the sounds of la and ra. And in the old days, if you watched a movie and somebody that was Japanese in that movie, they would mispronounce these words, and it was so funny. In modern times, we don't do this to the Japanese. It's too insulting to them. So we don't have them pronounce words with la and ra in it. Likewise, the Japanese language does not have a phoneme for va, although it does have one for ba. An adult who is exposed only to the Japanese language cannot perceive the differences between las and ras, or between bas and vas. Phonemes that sound obviously different to English speakers don't sound any different at all to the Japanese. So to the Japanese, if they pronounce the word lover, it sounds like rubber. They can't tell the difference between rubber and lover, which is almost as bad as what we just said before. Anyway, okay, lover and rubber. Of course, to us, there's obvious difference between the two, and we can make a distinction between the two, but the Japanese can't, because they don't have an R and they don't have an L. So lover sounds like rubber to them, or rubber sounds like lover to them. And if you said something like that, they wouldn't be able to tell what you were saying, as confusing as that is. Research suggests that young infants can discriminate among all the phonemes that humans are able to produce. Oddly enough, native English-speaking babies of 6 to 8 months can reliably distinguish between two sounds from the Hindi language. But they lose this capability at about somewhere between the 10th and 12th month. So if you're 6 to 8 months old, they can tell the difference between these phonemes, but later on they can't, because they're Hindi phonemes and they're not used in English. Even 4-day-old infants already have a preference for the rhythm of sounds from their own language over other languages, and we have done experiments where we have played a record to a child, and the child will attend to the record that is in English rather than another language. Because the sounds that their parents make, that their mothers and their fathers make, while they are in the womb, they are listening to the language. As you can imagine, they're sitting in a pool of water, a pool of liquid, and all the sounds are exaggerated for them. So they're listening to their mother speak. They're listening to their father speak. They're listening to their brother speak. They're listening to the records that their mother listens to. They're listening to all this stuff. And then when they, of course, once they're born, they attend to the language that they've heard. Their mother speaking, their father speaking, their baby brother speaking. If all that makes sense. And we have proven this. The Russian language is very different from the English language. The German language is very different. Even the French language is very different. And when they play a record that is in French, Russian, or German, the child does not pay attention to it, but they will listen to a record in English. This research suggests that we are biologically prepared to attend to human speech as we come into this world. We are predisposed to start picking up languages at an early age, obviously. Early in life, before puberty, our brains are especially pliable for organizing themselves in response to language input. And this happens before puberty. Later on, our brains are not as flexible. And of course, that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to learn languages after we start puberty. Humans are better at acquiring and mastering languages early in life. And of course, my daughter and my son, I took them over to Germany when they were, my son was 7 and my daughter was 9. And they can, both of them can still speak German. My son teaches English, or teaches English. My son teaches mathematics in Florida to monolingual individuals. And monolingual means they can't speak English. But he teaches mathematics to these kids because he speaks Spanish and he speaks German. So he can usually come up with a word that they understand, whoever they happen to be. But he learned a different language when he was 7 years old. So he has this capability. He picked up Spanish in California. He's working in the bar in California. As bizarre as that is. For bilinguals who learned their second language later on in life, one part of their brain is active when they hear the second language and another when they hear their native language. Both parts, of course, are in Broca's area. Broca's area is on your left side. And this is one of the reasons if you get a blow to your head and it's to the left side of your head, a lot of times we will talk to you and try to figure out if you have a concussion, if you've damaged that part of your head. And so we will start talking to you and we'll ask you a question like, who's the President of the United States? Or what day is it? We'll ask you a question so that you have to understand what we're saying. Because there may be damage to Broca's area. It's right here. Bilinguals who learn their second language early in life showed activation in the same part of the brain, regardless of whether they were hearing their second language or their native one. So an individual that has a mother that speaks one language and a father that speaks another language, and they learn the two languages at a very young age, these individuals use the same parts of their brains for both languages. But if you learn it later in life, then it's a different area of Broca's area that is activated. Does all that make sense? Okay. All right. And this is one of the reasons why, when you learn a second language later on in life, there's a kid from the Ukraine here, I think. I don't know if you've run into this guy, but I saw him at registration, and he's in Marius's class. And he comes by from time to time. And it's interesting because you can see him translating what you're saying to him. You can watch him translate in his brain. And it only takes him a couple seconds, but you can still see him translating in his own mind. Because he has like a 2-second delay on just about everything you say. So you have to make your sentences relatively short in order for him to understand what you're talking about. Now, as he speaks English more and more, then his translation time will be shorter. Eventually, he may start thinking in English instead of, I don't know, Russian or Ukrainian or whatever he speaks. I'm not sure what he speaks. Some Ukrainians speak German.
I don't they also speak Dutch too, don't they? I know.
Dutch and German are almost the same language.
Okay.
Don't tell the Dutch I said. When the Germans invaded Holland, they had no problems communicating with the people because the words were always the same. It's kind of like the difference between Apache and Navajo. No? Nobody understands? Okay. The words are just put together incorrectly, I guess. That's what they say about the Apache language. And they chop the end off of some of the words. Since we're picking on Germans, let's pick on Germans some more. Oh boy. Keller in 2007 looked at rearing practices of urban middle-class Germans, Greeks, Costa Ricans, and rural Indian Gujarati and Cameroonians. Now, one of the things you have to understand about India, there's like 1.2 billion people in India, and there's like 200 different languages. So when we talk about people in India, if you understand that all Indians aren't the same, that sounded logical, didn't it? Then you understand that they speak a lot of different languages and that there are a lot of different cultures that you're dealing with. If you've ever seen the movie Bend It Like Beckham, it's got Keira Knightley in it. It's an Indian family. and all those people wear turbans, those people are Sikhs, and it's a different group. These are Gujarati. They live near Delhi. Not that that's important, but it's just a different group. So when we talk about India, we can't just talk about Indians, people from India, because there's like 200 different groups there. It'd be like talking about American Indians, like all you guys looked and acted and spoke exactly the same language. It just doesn't make any sense. So when we talk about India, we have to talk about what group of Indians we're dealing with. The Gujarati and the Cameroonians, and of course Cameroon is a different country in Africa. But the reality is, of course, in Cameroon, just like every place else, there are different groups, different tribes, who speak different languages. And one of the reasons why they speak English so much in Africa, or French or German, is because they had so many different groups with so many different languages, they needed a common language. And so when, during the colonial period, when the English were in there, or the French were in there, or the Germans were in there, the European language became their common language. Does that make sense? Okay. Observing how much bodily contact the parents had with the infants, Keller found that European parents spend the least time in contact with their infants. So they touch them less than anybody else does. But that doesn't mean that they don't have positive contact. It just means they touch them less than anybody else. Remember, these are the people that build a separate room for the kid to sleep in. They try to train their children to not cry when they're by themselves. These are Europeans. The other groups, they touch the children a lot more than anybody else does. The infants from the other cultural groups spent the majority of their time being held by their mothers. During Keller's observation in 2007, there was not a single observation when the Cameroonian infant wasn't being held by its mother. So the Cameroonians never put the kid down. Europeans don't pick them up that much. But it gets kind of interesting after this. This is a Cameroonian mother. She's got her baby on her back. And the baby's asleep in a sling. It gets kind of interesting after this. Another variable that Keller investigated was the amount of face-to-face contact the mothers had with their infants. Face-to-face contact. That ain't face-to-face contact. That's face-to-back contact. Urban and European mothers spent most of their contact time in face-to-face contact. So the baby could actually watch them speaking. So whenever they were in contact with their children, they were in face-to-face contact. They were looking at each other, rather than the baby on the back, or the mother not looking at the child, or the child not being in any place special. This was not true of other mothers, especially the Gujarati, the people from India. And actually this is a picture of a Gujarati woman, and that's her baby, and she's in face-to-face contact. That was the only picture I could find. Okay. So the Gujaratis didn't make face-to-face contact at all. The Gujaratis, one of the interesting things about this culture is that they don't make eye contact with anybody. If they talk to you, they stand beside you and talk to you, and then you talk back to them, but they never look at each other. And the reason has to do with spit. They don't want you to spit in their face. As odd as that's not odd. It's not odd at all. But we make face-to-face contact, right? And we ignore it if somebody, some slobber comes out, or drool or whatever. But not the Gujaratis. They're very sensitive about these things. The responses of the German mothers were more contingent to the baby's cries and behaviors than was found with the Cameroonian mothers. And remember, the Cameroonian mothers never put their babies down. And this cultural difference predicted how quickly the babies learned to recognize themselves in a mirror. The more responsive their mothers were to their cries, the younger the child was able to show self-recognition skills. Okay, so there's positives and negatives. Sure, German women do not pick up their babies as much. They don't touch their babies. But when they do touch their babies, it's mostly face-to-face contact. And because of that, the baby recognized themselves as a separate entity from their mothers at a younger age. They knew that they were a select being rather than an extension of their mother. You can imagine if you're always touching your mother, that you feel like you're part of her. Everything that she does, you do. You're always there. You're always interacting with whatever she's interacting with. So you feel like you're an extension of your mother. Learning that others will respond to their cries facilitates infants' recognition that they have a distinct identity. And of course that has something to do with it as well. The fact that when you cry, the mother reacts. You can imagine if you are sleeping on the back of your mother and you start crying because you need your diaper changed, and your mother always reacts to everything that you do. So you can't make a select cry. If you cry, your mother reacts to you. But in this case, if you cry and you're just pissed off, your mother's not going to react to you. But she is going to react to you if you're hungry or you need your diaper changed. And so you understand, you more readily understand the fact that you are a separate entity from your mother. Okay. Urban European baby, oh, she's pregnant again. Did you hear that? She's about to have her third kid. Aren't we excited? Kate's knocked up again. The royal family did something right. We got somebody pregnant. Oh, they got Kate Middleton pregnant. Urban European babies tend to occupy... I said knocked up on the film again. Jeff, that's your fault. Oh, way to go. Urban European babies tend to occupy their own physical space. They are often in face-to-face contact with their mothers, putting them in a position to interact with their mothers as separate beings, as in turn-taking conversations, and their mothers are more responsive to their individual needs. Okay, so... and I don't know if you've ever been around a baby, when the baby's 5 or 6 months old, you talk to the baby and the baby babbles back to you, and you talk to the baby and the baby babbles back to you. Okay, so that's what's taking place here with the European baby, and because of that, they realize that they are a separate entity more readily than Cameroonian babies, or Greek babies, or Costa Rican babies, or Gujarati babies. In other cultures, infants share the same physical space with their mothers. Mothers are not as likely to be in a position to interact with their infants through face-to-face contact because, of course, they carry them on their backs. So the baby is part of what the mother's doing, but the baby's not making face-to-face contact. So they don't learn languages as readily as a European baby, because a European baby not only can look you in the eye when you're talking to them, but you're looking them in the eye when they're talking back to you. So what they're trying to do is mimic what they see. Babies do that. Babies try to mimic what they see. When I worked in the nursery, I would stick my tongue out sometimes. And I told you how much trouble I got into for sticking my tongue out. Evidently, in some cultures, like the Catholic culture in Omaha, it means something nasty. So I was warned not to do that again. Stick my tongue out and teach the babies how to stick their tongues out. In some regions of Africa, the Caribbean, and India, infants receive daily massage and an exercise regime, such as stretching their limbs or putting them into sitting positions. So they're like a masseuse, and they're stretching the baby out, and they're manipulating their legs. And these experiences shape their development, and those who receive this kind of massage and exercise begin to sit on their own and walk at an earlier age than those that do not. And of course, I don't know that we do. I didn't do this with my kids, but we had my kids on the ground a lot, and they started walking. My son started walking at 8 months, just older than 7 months. And my daughter started walking at 9 months. My grandson didn't start walking until he was like 13, 14 months old. But his dad is Dutch. bastard. Meanest son of a bitch. Well, we won't go into that. He's Dutch. Cultural practices such as putting infants to sleep on their backs rather than their stomachs can delay when children begin to crawl, roll over, or learn to stand. And the odd thing about my children is that neither one of them crawled at all. They just got up and started walking. So neither of them crawled. So something's going on. There's something wrong with both of those kids, obviously. In cultures that do not encourage crawling, large proportions of the children never crawl, but instead scoot along on their butts or proceed directly to walking. And that's what happened with my kids. They proceeded directly to walking. They didn't scoot along on their butts. However, I've got a niece, redhead. I don't know if that has anything to do with her butt scooting, but she scooted along on her butt for like ever. She didn't even start walking until she was 13 or 14 months old. She scooted along on her butt. She never crawled. She just kind of hopped around along on her butt. Now there's something wrong with that kid today, and I don't know if it has anything to do with butt scooting or not. She's schizophrenic, and I don't know if that has to do with scooting around on your butt. I have no idea. Probably not. If you are of a European descent and grew up in a North American household, the odds are that your parents set aside a room in their house, perhaps decorating it with pastel colors and scenes of romping bunny rabbits, and put a crib in it for you to sleep in. Probably, if you're of a European descent. In a study of 136 societies, infants in 2/3 of these groups slept in the same bed as their mothers. In the majority of the other cases, infants slept in the same room as their mothers, but in a different bed. American parents were the only ones in a survey of 100 societies who created a separate room for the babies to sleep in. Only American parents, as odd as that seems. My wife was my first wife, because she's the only one I had babies with, but we breastfed my son, and he was the second child. But she was so adamant about the child not sleeping with us that if he cried during the night, she wouldn't get up and go get the baby. I had to go get the baby, and as long as she was asleep, I would attach the baby to her breast, and he would suckle. And then when he was done, I'd take him back and put him back to bed. Because if she woke up, she'd put him back to bed, and she wouldn't feed him at all. That's how mean my first wife was. She didn't even want to suckle the kid. So I used to sneak the kid in and attach him to her breast, and I know that sounds horrible. Anyway, something wrong with that lady. The practice of co-sleeping is also quite common in other subcultures in the United States. African Americans, for example, Asian Americans co-sleep with their children, and Hispanics. The practice of people sleeping separately in their own beds has not yet been identified in a single subsistence society around the world. So everybody sleeps with their babies, except Americans, except white Americans, it looks like. Because African Americans, Asian Americans, and Hispanics sleep with their babies. But my wife, you couldn't pay that lady to let that baby sleep in the bed. It was strange. I didn't understand it at all. She's the one that wanted to breastfeed, and then she wouldn't, I don't know, something wrong with her. Or maybe there's something wrong with me. I'm not really very good at selecting wives. I made 2 mistakes out of 3, so evidently I'm really bad at it. Schwader et al. In 1995 developed a study where they gave participants a scenario as to how to house a family in 3 bedrooms. And the family consisted of a mother, a father, a son that was 15, a son that was 11, a son that was 8, a daughter that was 14, and a daughter that was 3. So how in the world would you put this together? How would you build a house for all of these children? Who would you put in these? There's only 3 bedrooms. So how would you do it? Go ahead, figure it out.
Mother and father in one room.
All the boys in one room and all the girls in another room.
Okay?
That would do it.
What do you think?
Maybe, the son and daughter that are 3 and 8, they can share a room, so
Okay.
younger.
Okay.
The, daughter that's 14, she gets her own room, and then the son,
You've only got 3 bedrooms.
11 and 15,
You've only got 3 bedrooms.
can sleep on the couch. I don't know.
How many couches do you have in your house? What do you think, Chris?
The mother and father in one room, the boys in one, and the daughters in the other.
Oh, so you agree with Jeff. What do you think, Michelle?
I've seen it done happen. I've seen it.
Okay.
Let them all stay in the living room.
They all say it's in the living room. What do you think, Brandon? How are you going to do
I
it?
agree with both of them.
Okay. Okay, I was just curious. There is no right answer, by the way.
I mean, people that were raised the old ways are like that in Nahogan, so
They all sleep in the living room.
like one room.
Yeah. Okay. All right. 88% of Americans, given the scenario, choose the following configuration. Room 1, father and mother. Room 2, the 2 daughters share the room. Room 3, the 3 sons share that room. And this is known as the Brady Bunch solution, as bizarre as that seems. If you remember the Brady Bunch, all the girls slept in one room, all the boys slept in one room. Of course, all the girls were sisters, and all the boys were brothers, but they weren't brothers and sisters to each other because it was a blended family. And then mom and dad slept in another room. I guess Alice slept downstairs in the maid's room. I don't know. Americans seek to avoid incest. The second most important principle was the sacred couple, of course. Married couples should be given their own space for emotional intimacy and sexual privacy, and who can argue with that? The third most important principle is the autonomy. The belief that young children who are needy and vulnerable should learn to be self-reliant and take care of themselves. So this is the way Americans threw things together. 88% of Americans did exactly what you guys did. They put the mother and father together, the daughters together, and the sons together. And of course, incest is important, so you don't want to put a teenage, and this actually happened in the last Brady Bunch movie, where both Marcia and what's the older boy's name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, they were sleeping together up in the attic, remember? And of course, they're not really related they're only related by marriage. I know, 2 teenagers with all those raging hormones in the same room. They had a sheet separating the I was appalled. When people in India were given the same scenario, they based their answers on the following 4 criteria. The incest avoidance. Post-pubescent children of the opposite sex should not sleep in the same room. Protection of the vulnerable. Young children should not be left alone at night. Female chastity anxiety. Post-pubescent females should always be chaperoned. And respect for hierarchy. Post-pubescent boys are conferred social status by not having them sleep with parents or their young children. So the post-pubescent boys have to be alone, as confusing as that is. One of the most popular configurations from India involved bedroom 1, mother and father, and 3-year-old daughter. Bedroom 2, 14-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son. And bedroom 3, 15-year-old son and 11-year-old son. That was the most popular configuration in India. Okay? So you've got your 14-year-old daughter chaperone, your 15-year-old son has his own room with his other brother, but they have an autonomy that they have to maintain. So the 3-year-old daughter, of course, she's vulnerable, so she sleeps with mom and dad. A second popular Indian configuration involved bedroom 1, father and 8-year-old son, bedroom 2, 15-year-old son and 11-year-old son, and bedroom 3, the mother, the 3-year-old daughter, and the 14-year-old daughter. So the daughter, once again, is chaperoned. And we're running out of time. Okay, why don't we stop right here, and we'll find out where mommy is next time. Where's mommy? Or Waldo. I hope mommy Waldo isn't your mommy. That would be confusing.